Tonight, we're going to talk about marketing automation. So I just thought I'd kick it off. The first thing I want to do was perhaps a land acknowledgement. And I really want to acknowledge that I am on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And I just feel really honored and privileged to be on this land and to be able to share my wisdoms with all of you tonight, as well as learn from you. And I'm hoping that, you can even maybe give me a tip or two or provide some context as we go through this lesson. Tonight, we are going to talk about marketing automation. And while that's a really exciting topic, and people often think about this in terms of saving time and how they can better support their customers, I would also challenge you to use maybe some of the tools that we discussed tonight to think about how you can use those to better connect and maybe build strong relationships with the communities we are part of, as well as the world at large. I hope that maybe the time that you might gain through some of these automation techniques will allow you to use that time to maybe have some more important human connections that are more meaningful to those around us. So let's think about that and as another use of what we learned tonight. So to kick it off, what are we going to learn? One of the things I'm hoping by the end of the session or this presentation, that you can understand or identify some areas for marketing automation within your organization. We'll learn areas for marketing automation, the pros and cons of marketing automation, and hopefully also really start to understand some of the tools and best practices that best meet the needs of your organization. Because that might not be every tool, probably not every tool I mentioned tonight. So hopefully you can get some nuggets as we go through it. So what I'm going to cover is first the definition of marketing automation, a little bit about the market and how to get started. Then we're going to talk about specific areas where marketing automation can be applied, the pros and cons, some best practices. Then there is going to be sort of this brain dump of common marketing automation tools, because that's often what people are most interested in. And then also some action items, next steps. And finally, as usual, I will always have sort of a whole slew of additional links and resources, because tonight I can't cover everything. So places and articles where you can read about more of these and maybe get some other additional information. So let's get started. As some context, I just want to say that I've done several other digital marketing webinars that go into some of these areas in a lot more depth. So we're going to touch on some of them, but I don't have time to cover in all these things. So here are links to some of the previous ones that we've done, everything from website SEO and landing pages, paid advertising, email marketing, even the digital marketing analytics talks about lead scoring, which we will discuss tonight. So that's kind of a context. I just wanted to give you context. Like tonight's going to be kind of a superset of a lot of those other ones. So you have these links, you can always check those out. And they're roughly also about an hour long. So I just want to do that. So I'm going to kick it off with what is marketing automation. And I really like this sort of definition by Neil Patel, who is a fairly well-known marketer, digital marketing marketer. And he says marketing automation is a process of using software and technology to optimize, automate, and measure repetitive online marketing tasks. I think that's a really good thing. You want to think about what are some of those repetitive online tasks that you have, and are there better ways that we could automate them so we can free up time and maybe focus on something else that we're doing. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about the marketing technology landscape, sometimes called MarTech, or often called MarTech for short, is that there are a lot of companies in this area. And literally there's a company called MarTech that just released the 2022 map of, these are all logos of companies in the MarTech world. And you can see that they've basically broken it up into sort of 6 different areas. There's sort of advertising and promotion, content and experience, social and relationships, commerce, sales, data, and management. And if you actually click on the image, I believe in your handouts, it will take you to the webpage where this is all it should, but you can go to martechmap.com as well to see this, and management. So these are logos for all the companies that are in these various areas. And what's really interesting is that there are roughly now almost 10,000 companies just in the MarTech space. So I really suffered today trying to figure out, how do I do this topic in an hour? How do I actually cover all of these things in an hour? So I'm going to do the best I can, but I'm telling you, I'm only scratching the surface. And as you think about what you want to do, start thinking about these various areas, and there are different vendors and suppliers in all of these different areas. So my point is, one size does not fit all, right? The other thing to keep in mind here is that if you look at things, we've really grown. 2011, there were 150 companies that sort of qualified as marketing technology companies. Now we have almost 10,000. So there's been incredible growth over the last sort of 11 years. And I only see that sort of accelerating as we're trying to really build connections, and there are more and more things. What's really been fueling this has been SaaS, sort of the software as a service model. There's a recent survey that talked about how many, like, the average number of SaaS app subscriptions companies are subscribing to. And, between 1 and 1,000 employees, there are 200 different SaaS applications that they make use of. And then for something like people with over 5,000 employees, they're subscribing to almost 600 different SaaS models, not just marketing, but all kinds of business processes. So there are a lot of things going on in that SaaS space. And that's why there are all these companies that are entering the market. So the question now is where to start. How do I get started with this, Rochelle? Where do I tackle? It seems like this, I've just shown you 10,000 companies, right? How do you actually whittle it down to the ones that make sense for me? So I'm going to kick it off and say the first place to start is really with your customer journey, and thinking about your customers, and really understanding what is the process, and where do you want to automate tasks, and where can you get the most bang for your buck? Generally speaking, when we look at these things, I'm going to make a very simple journey here, but the first part of the journey is sort of the awareness. And sometimes this is a funnel. I'm going to make this more of a circle, but awareness and lead generation. How do I get people aware of who we are and maybe interested in what we have to offer, right? Generating some leads. And so that would be the first step. And the question is that an area where you would like to automate more, or not? So I'm bringing these up as sort of, when you're thinking about these tools, instead of thinking about the tools, think about where in your customer journey do you want to automate steps. Secondly is engagement and nurturing. And really, again, where, do you want to automate some of the engagement that you have with leads or with potential customers, or nurturing leads or nurturing customers, or even like customer success on the customer support side, doing some kind of automation. So you really want to think about where in that journey might there be opportunities, right? And then finally, analysis and optimization. So many of us are using Google Analytics to sort of pool that information, but we want to think about, do we want a dashboard? What do we want to sort of keep note of on the analysis piece? And what do we want to optimize? And are there tools that can better help us optimize what we already have? And then, as I like to say, rinse, repeat, right? So you want to kind of go and continue the circle. Once you've had these systems, you kind of go back and revisit to make sure that they're still working for you, right? It's not something that you set it and forget it. You definitely want to continue with it and make sure it makes sense. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to interrupt or just put in the chat. So again, how do we get started? The first thing is focus on the customer journey. And what you see here is another breakout of the customer journey. This is something we often see: awareness, consideration, purchase, service, or support, and loyalty. And so you want to focus on that and look at what's happening. What are your customers doing, or what are potential customers doing at each one of these stages? And then you want to identify, what are the touch points? What are the areas where we're actually interacting with them, where we're communicating with them? And some of these might be digital. That's what a lot of us, our first thought, but it also could be physical touch points, right? And which one of those touch points might I be able to automate, right? And so breaking it down, that's really important to sort of think about where is the potential for automation in our processes. Then you want to evaluate your team's skills and motivations. And what I mean by this is, marketing automation, it's another tool, it's another software thing. So what can your team handle, or what are they interested in? It's not just a matter of putting the tool in place. If they don't like it, if they have trouble using it, it's not going to work, right? So that's something you definitely want to think about, what you want to do, but also what your team is capable of doing and what they're interested in doing. And then think about, how do we build processes that will guide or move the customers from touch point to touch point? That's really what automation is about. It's about making them move through this journey faster, more smoothly, with less hiccups. and getting them to, ultimately your sort of conversions of either purchase and loyalty, becoming evangelists, ambassadors, influencers on your behalf. That's the goal, right? So how can you get them through this journey much more quickly, and still sort of maintain maybe and reduce the amount of resources, financial, human, or technological resources to get there, right? So how can you do that the most easiest way and smoothest way? So those are kind of very general, how to get started. In terms of where, so some people are like, okay, Rochelle, that's great, customer journey. Specifically, where might you think about marketing automation? Well, you saw those categories: content and experience, social, different areas. But here are some of the ones where most people think about it. So I'm going to talk about website flow. And this is really sort of user interface, user experience. And what I mean by this is, I'm going to get to the SEO part, but I'm talking about literally what are people clicking on, heat maps, things like that. What is making sense around that space? So there are tools that can help automate so you can get more insight about what is that user experience or customer experience, CX, sometimes you will hear, what is that all about and how well are we delivering on that? So tools that evaluate what the customers are doing, right? Then there's website SEO. And this can really look at sort of literally keywords that you have, but it can also look at links, meaning backlinks from other websites, which increase your ranking on the search engine page results page, loading times for web pages. It can identify if you have something that's really bloated. And a lot of people use these on their websites to really optimize for the best experience. But don't forget, you can actually use these same tools for your competitors. And that's actually a really good use of these tools, because if it can do it for yours, why not do an audit on your competitors' website to really understand what they're doing and how they've done things? So you also have a benchmark, right? So it's not just about your own, but use this also for competitive information as well. Another one we're seeing a lot more are online chats and chatbots. So this is coming into play. I mean, how many times have you gone to a website and they have the live chat, but somebody's offline, no one's there, right? Because it's 3 a.m. or whatever. There are things that are happening. I recently used a chat bot for Purelator that I was really impressed by. And it was very automated because they have, tracking numbers and things like that. But there are things that in some ways, I don't want to sit on a call and press numbers. But if I can just answer questions in a digital format, that might be something that you can do. It doesn't replace human support, but it might be, again, we're talking about those repetitive questions, those things that come in over and over again. It might be a little bit something to consider as well. And then there's content creation or content marketing. Content marketing is a big, sort of strategic marketing activity, but we're seeing a lot more automation around content creation. There are a lot of AI services that will give you headlines, that will take SEO keywords and then sort of give you some ideas of articles that you could write. Some are actually writing the articles themselves using sort of natural language processing and GPT-3, which is something that can create things in a more natural language. They're okay, but I would actually recommend them more as starting points than sort of just taking the AI written article and posting it to your website. You probably want to read it, make sure it's your voice, your tone, but that can often help in terms of that writing process, which people say can be a big time sink. And especially if you're not a great writer, meaning, you just don't think you are, editing something's a lot easier than coming up with something from a blank page. The other thing, social media. So we've seen a lot of this. Social media is probably in some ways the forefront where a lot of people are looking at scheduled posting. It could also be messaging. So we see a lot of companies that are actually using Facebook as Facebook, for example, or WhatsApp to message their clients, their customers. So it becomes sort of the communication channel. So that's something to keep, or even commenting. A lot of people will have bots or marketing automation services that allow them to find out if people have so basically mention them so they can then respond. And so like just keep tracking, are people talking about us? Are people talking about my brand? And then you can either comment, but it just alerts you if there's conversations happening. The other thing is paid advertising. So paid advertising, there is actually what we call programmatic advertising, which is often an automated version where they can sometimes do A/B testing. So they can actually split things and give different wording to different audiences. And so you can get a better sense of what's happening, which ad is performing better. There's also some automation around bidding itself, like what am I bidding for? What's the best, cost per click bid that I should put in? And so there are systems that can do that as well. Email marketing is probably the most sort of obvious one that a lot of people immediately think about when they think of marketing automation. And this is around lead acquisition, email sequences, things along those lines that can really help get leads, can nurture them, and hopefully do a lot of lead management around that. But email marketing by no means is the only one, but it probably is the one that most people think about when they first think of marketing automation. And then I would put this one in. Basically, marketing automation can actually allow you to do things you are not doing right now. So one of the biggest things I hear from a lot of my clients when I work with them is, Rochelle, this is great. We want to do it. We just don't have the time. We don't have the people. And so sometimes marketing automation can actually give you time to actually do those things you are not doing. So it might free up time so you can do other things, or it might free up time so that you can start doing things that you haven't been doing. So I just wanted to highlight that, because often people are always thinking about where I can apply it, but don't forget opportunity costs. What are the things you are not doing? Let's look at that as well, because sometimes if you are doing that, that would help. Okay. In terms of pros and cons, pros are pretty obvious. Generally, marketing automation can be really great in saving time. That's usually the most obvious thing. It can be more increased efficiency, productivity, give you a really good return on your investment for the time that you put into things. It actually gives you maybe some improved visibility and understanding of what's happening with your customers. Sometimes we don't get to see the bigger picture, and marketing automation can do that really well. It can start seeing patterns for you. It can sort of deliver more personalized interactions and relationships, because they can look at what someone has done and say, hey, this is what they've done. Based on what they've done before, let's send them something else or a piece of content because they signed up for this webinar, we matched, So it can actually provide a lot more personalized interactions and connect those dots much more quickly than we would if we had to go through all of the data. It can provide some consistency of messaging. So the messaging is actually consistent. And that can be really great in terms of just, making sure it happens all the time and it's happening in a consistent pace sometimes. It can break down silos. One of the things around marketing automation is that it actually often integrates information from a lot of different areas of your business. So that's sometimes really great, because you can, have some visibility and people can have visibility into what you're doing. So that's a pro. And it often can help you scale. So one of the things that Peter and I were working with a client, and they had they were using HubSpot as their CRM, and they had actually paid like the most expensive, monthly version of it. And people were like, ooh, it's like $2,000 or $2,500 a month. But it actually allowed this particular entrepreneur to not have to hire a new salesperson, not have to hire a new marketing person. And so while the monthly cost seemed pretty high, what it actually gave him in terms of he could manage a lot more just himself without having to actually do more hiring was well worth it. So it can really help you scale, and hopefully you'll have some processes in place that actually can scale with you. On the con side, it can be very time consuming to set it up and to get the integrations going. And so I'm not going to lie, one of the biggest things is you're going to have to invest time getting these processes set up. And so a lot of people, it's always hard. It's like, I don't have time to do this. It's one of those things you almost have to make time because you will gain it later on, but it is definitely one of the challenges with these costs. There are free marketing automation tools, and often they'll have a free version or a freemium version. Ultimately, I find that to get the most out of your automation, you are going to have to pay something. And so free is just not going to cut it. But if you actually can even think about if it's $100 a month, what's $100 of your time worth? It might well be worth it, or even $200 of your time, or $300. We've gotten very cheap, I'm going to say, in terms of when we look at monthly subscription fees. We want everything really inexpensively, but this can actually help you in the long run. So don't be penny wise, pound foolish. Really try to think about how you can get the most out of it. There can be steep learning curves depending on the technology that you're using. And so sometimes that's also hard. That kind of flows into that time consuming setup and integration. So sometimes that's a little bit difficult. That could be, and if your team also steep learning curve. One of the challenges sometimes you have is you can also have potentially generic communications. If you aren't really good about sending out your systems, they start sounding like really bland, right? It's just like, like, okay, this sounds like everything else, or you've made it so that it works for everyone as opposed to and then works for no one, right? So you want to make sure that you're trying to get that personalized interaction as much as possible. But to get it personalized, you've got to invest more in the process. So doing a simple automation may result in some generic communications that don't really land as well. All of us have messaging fatigue. So what I mean by this is we all get lots of messages all the time, and we can't keep up. So, think about your customers, think about, potential customers in the same way. And so, when there are lots of emails, if I have a 10 email sequence, that person is potentially getting 10 emails from me, they could get really fatigued by number 5, right? And so really be cognizant about, using them wisely, judiciously, and make sure that they count and that there's value in the communications that you are sending. The other thing is marketing automation does not fix inefficiencies in your processes. If your process is inefficient and you automate it, it will still be inefficient. So part of using these tools is really looking at that and trying to understand where can we improve, where can we optimize. If you just translate something that isn't working to automation, it might not work any better there than it does manually or the way you're doing it now. So, some people think, oh, I'll do marketing automation, it'll fix everything. It may not. It may save you some time, but it may not fix the reasons why things aren't working. And the other thing that, I would often say is marketing automation is great once you have systems and processes understood, but you also can miss customer insights or opportunities because it's all being managed by a computer or by a system or by logic. And it's not, so as human beings, we might be like talking to a customer and something happens, you're like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I could go in this direction. You're not going to get those insights if it's really automated and you're not really involved. So for some things around sort of customer insights and information, sometimes it's good not to automate processes at the beginning so you can get some of that information. But then once you understand it, you can automate it later on. Any questions so far? All good. Okay. Next, best practices. So let's talk about some best practices for marketing automation, things that I have worked with people that work well. I can't do a marketing presentation this one statement. I always have the statement somewhere in there. You always have to define your audience. Like, who is it you are talking to? Who is it you are communicating with? That is like marketing 101. And that can be customer personas, which we go into a lot of detail in some of the other webinars that I talk about, but define your audience. Make sure you know who you are talking to. The other thing, map or create optimal customer journeys. And this is building on that point before. This is an opportunity to look at how you do things and maybe even find better ways to do that. So don't just replicate what you've been doing, also look at what might be a better way to do that. And is there an optimal way that we could do that? And sometimes the tools can help you, but also just literally brainstorming on a whiteboard, I think, is almost the best way to do that so that you can come up with that before you start fighting with a tool or feeling limited even by a tool, but really trying to figure out what do you want to see and then finding the tool that works for you to do that, right? And so that's something around that whole marketing automation. It's a great opportunity to come up with those optimal things. Set SMART goals and targets that are tied to business outcomes. I see lots of people set SMART goals and targets, but if they aren't tied to business outcomes, meaning why are you doing this and how will this actually help you move your business or organization forward or reach your goals? I don't care. Like, I don't care how many people liked my post if I can't really explain how that's going to help us do something else. As far as I'm concerned, that's just a vanity sort of metric. And so you want to make sure that they're smart and that they actually are tied to business outcomes. You want to then categorize and prioritize leads. So this is something around lead scoring. So if you're using it around lead sort of lead generation, lead nurturing, lead management, you want to categorize and prioritize your leads. And I go into lead scoring in my analytics webinar, but that is something that's really important. Like, how do you make sure that when things are coming in, you know who's most important and who's not? You want to deliver targeted, relevant content at the right time. And this is, I know this is sort of the holy grail for all marketers, but that often requires some A/B testing. So you want to make sure that there is some A/B testing. It's great to go with your gut. There's nothing better than actually testing it and seeing what the results actually say. So A/B testing is great. Create omni-channel experiences. They say that it takes somewhere between 7 to 9 touch points before someone actually remembers our brand, before they actually sort of internalize what we say. So you're going to have multiple touch points before people probably either go, oh yeah, I know who they are. And so think about different channels. And, also when you're looking at tools, make sure that they maybe can work in multiple ways around these different channels of touch points. Validate digital behaviors. Sometimes I also get people who are like, well, this is what we saw in the data. This is how they behave. And so then they can move forward. Before you move forward, maybe just try to have some human interaction almost and talk to someone and go, hey, this is what we saw. Can someone confirm that this is what in fact we're seeing? Because, we may also be seeing only the behaviors of a very small slice of our target audience. And you don't want to base your whole sort of business model on a very small slice of what others are doing. So validate those behaviors that you're seeing if you can, through literally like reaching out, human outreach, and just make sure that what you're seeing is actually valid, that you can verify what you're seeing sort of applies to a larger swath of people. The other thing, keep your databases clean. This is something that seems really obvious, but one of the things you want to do is make sure that you're cleaning them and that the information that is there is appropriate. There's, as they say, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you have information that isn't really valid, or that doesn't give the information that you want, you're not going to be able to analyze it and come up with the right insights. Listen and monitor your channel reputability. And what I mean by that is your reputation. So you want to make sure if people are talking about you, what are they saying? Make sure you understand that you are part of those conversations. You can no longer control those conversations, but you should at least be aware of them. So you want to listen and monitor what people are saying about you, your brand, or even your space, your industry. I'm a big fan of collecting data that supports decision making. This is not collecting all data, but just the data that supports decisions. What decision do you want to make? And then figure out what data you need to know in order to make that decision. Often I find people are just collecting as much data as they possibly can, and then they get overwhelmed. So starting from the end, going, what do I need to know in order to make better decisions? And then basically collecting just that data. Evaluate and assess outcomes and results often. So this is an iterative approach. This is sort of that agile way of doing things often with marketing automation. Things change quickly in digital, so make sure you're checking that often and that makes sense. Train your teams, train people on the actual software that you're using, and make sure that it's compatible with their capabilities. And along those lines, incentivize the behaviors and usage you want to see. So one of the things I often see are people like, they get all these new tools and shiny, and they're like, oh, we're going to do this, but there is no sort of reward for using it, or there's no reward for making decisions based on it. So, to change our habits, we kind of need a reward, many of us. So there has to be some cycle of, I'm going to take a risk, and there's got to be some reward in terms of what I'm doing, it, especially when you are introducing some of these things. So these are some of the things that I've seen that have really helped marketing automation sort of initiatives work well. The other thing is, so what do you want to consider if you're looking at one? For those of you that are considering a new marketing tool, automation tool, ease of use is a big one. And it's not just like, oh, is this really cool and it has great uses, but you're based on your team's capabilities, how your team will use it, and maybe even the size of your team. That all impacts what ease of use is. So ease of use is not universal. It is very subjective, and it really depends on who's using it. So make sure that the tool works with those that will be using it. You want to think about the available features, customization, and scope. So what features do they have? Can you customize it? Like, is there ability to customize it? And how broad, like what does it cover? And most people go at this and they go, this makes sense, Rochelle, based on where you are today. But what are your future needs going to be as well? Don't think about just where I am today. Think about in the future, what might I need? Because if you can't grow with this tool, you may find that this tool only works for a year, and then you have to go learn yet another tool because you've grown beyond the scope of this one. So just understand, how broad it can be, how deep, and then how custom can it be. Integration options are a really big thing. I'll talk about this shortly, but what other technologies do you have that have to integrate with some of these things? So we call this, your technology stack. This is a big criteria. And I would say that the biggest thing here is really how do you integrate with other tools? Some tools will only integrate with certain software packages, so that just that in and of itself may sort of get it off your short list because you don't have those pieces of software, or maybe you do, and that's the one that works best because it's meant to work with that. Data analytics, what does it include? What is it covering? What is it capturing? What metrics, what analytics do you have access to? So again, we're moving to a much more data-driven society, data-driven businesses. So understand the scope of what they can include. Security. If you think about this, if you're moving customer data across and doing things in interesting ways, how are they dealing with that? You know, either personal information or credit cards or whatever. It may not be required, but something to maybe keep on your mind. So these are not absolutely all the questions you have to ask, but think about what data is being shared and is there a security issue that we need to keep in mind around that, right? And do they address that? Clearly the costs, how much does it cost is a big one, budget, but what are the limits and how scalable is it? So often they'll have different tiers of packages. So, you know, what are the limits at each tier? And, you know, again, back to that scope and scalability, is this going to be able to scale with me as I grow, right? Or is this going to be something that'll sort of keep me a little bit, my hands tied because it's not really that flexible. Customer support and community. You want to look at what customer support do they have? What's the breadth of it? Sometimes what's the cost? Because that can be part of those packages. Sometimes the free version is we'll get back to you in a week. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you have to pay a little bit more to get better support. And is there a community supporting this tool? That can also be really helpful because that tells you, will this tool also be sort of supported going forward, or is this something that is very unique and maybe if this company goes out of business we're going to be like, you know, toast. So you want to think about, again, is there a community, is there an active community, and things along those lines. Training and onboarding materials, again, breadth, availability, and costs around that. So do they have training materials? What is their onboarding process? You know, this can even be as simple as, are there lots of YouTube videos or not? So it doesn't even have to be from the company, but that kind of builds on the community that we were talking about. Just giving you a sense of how difficult will this be to get up to speed. Remember that learning curve we talked about, that's really important. And then finally, customer reviews and references. You want to obviously check them out, make sure that they're people who are happy with them, but don't just be like, oh, they have happy customers, yay. Think about also, what are the customers, what types of customers are using it? What are the size of those customers that are using it? What industries are using it? And how are they using it? Because I've often seen people go, well, yeah, they had great reviews. And then I look at the customers, I'm like, yeah, but that's a completely different industry or completely different way of using it than what you're doing. So that's great. And I'm happy that they're doing that for that thing, but that doesn't really apply to your organization or your company. So make sure that when you're looking at sort of those reviews, that it really maps to what you guys are seeking and what you need. Finally, I'm going to talk about, there is something called the Stackies. It is an annual competition hosted where they actually ask companies to create an infographic where they have a sort of a theme and they lay out their marketing stack, their MarTech stack. And here's one submission from this last year. This is from Esri, the GIS company. And you can see what they have here is they have like acquisition, nurturing, retention, insights and analytics, productivity, and comms and collaboration. And what they've listed it here because it's all about sort of, you know, spatial. They've put it in the space thing and they've listed all the different tools that they're using. I've given you a link to the full handout where you can see like 32 different companies and what the marketing stacks are at the end. So this was just one example, but I thought this was just interesting. You can get a sense of what tools is someone using and what does that make sense. I'm not saying this is right for everyone, but some of these are going to be familiar, others might be new to you. So it's just a great way to see what different organizations are doing every year. I love reading these because it gives me like, oh, I've never heard of this. And I can discover sort of new things that are happening. The next thing that I want to highlight here are sort of the tools. Let's get into the tools. Everybody's like, oh, Rochelle, let's get to it. Like, what do you recommend? So let's start with the complicated answer, all-in-one solution. So all-in-one solutions are usually what everyone wants. Give me one tool, I'll learn one tool, my team will learn one tool, make our lives simple. And I'm going to give you a list of all of these that exist, but there are always trade-offs. So a one tool will probably be maybe great in one area, but maybe their email marketing is not so awesome, or maybe their website auditor is not great. it might be okay across a lot of different areas. So you have to really figure out what's best for you. Like, do you want to just learn one tool and try to do the best you can? Or are you going to do best of breed and try to sort of find the best tool for you in very specific areas? So what I've given you here are sort of some of the list of some of the common all-in-one solutions. And what's interesting is, while these all say they're all in one, they come at it from different perspectives. So some are coming at it from a CRM perspective. Some are coming from what you're finding in marketing automation. Like, people are saying like ActiveCampaign actually came a little bit more from the email marketing, but they keep adding on more and more features. So it's becoming a more holistic solution. So some of these you might be like, yeah, Rochelle, I've heard of them, but they often might have started in a certain area and now they're expanding their sort of their solutions into different areas. So I don't have time to go through all of them, but basically in your handouts, you have links and you can just click on all the links and you can basically check them out. I also have some articles that talk about sort of the pros and cons pricing of a lot of these different ones. So we'll get to that at the very end here. The next thing I want to highlight was sort of content creation. And again, as I mentioned, these are all, and maybe you are familiar with them, maybe you are not. But these are all tools that are really around coming up with ideas, sort of SEO, keyword oriented blog posts, articles, headlines. Headline here at the bottom is about coming up with really compelling headlines based on a particular search engine keyword. So I think all the rest though do actually come up with, they will give you a content brief that you can start with and things that they recommend. Some of them will come up with questions you can answer based on a search word. Here's a common question people ask. You've done Google searches where it says, people also asked this. People are now clicking on that. So now the search term is, what is content creation using AI? It's no longer just keywords, but an actual question. So you might want to create a piece of content that actually answers that question, right? So they were helping you with questions around that. So something to keep in mind there. Here is also a list of, I pulled this from my other sort of webinar, but kind of some of the website SEO, UI, UX tools, along with sort of their price and some of their features. Here you'll see, for example, Hotjar is one that does heat maps that you can use. HubSpot has their own website grader. Google search, so they're a couple of free, but a lot of them are, between, I'd say 50 to 400. Sometimes of them are up to 1,000, but the 1,000 is usually like enterprise. But 400 I find is kind of like the sweet spot where most of them end, and it really depends on what you want to do with it. So you can check some of those out around SEO tools, and they will go through. They will do a full audit. They will give you back. They will tell you what's wrong, what's working, how to fix them, and provide recommendations. Many of them, so that could be really helpful without you having to go through it yourself. In terms of some other things, social media, as we mentioned, lots of social media automation tools. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Hootsuite, our Vancouver darling, but Buffer is another really good one. CoSchedule, Sprout Social, those are probably the top 4. Social Chief and Content Studio are coming up, and Social Pilot pretty strong. Meet Edgar, I've been hearing a lot about that. Napoleon Cat is a fairly new one, and Tailwind is specifically focused on Instagram and Pinterest. So what you also might find are some of these tools have a focus, like they don't do all social media, but they have they're really optimized for Twitter, or they're really optimized for Instagram or Pinterest in this case. So keep that in mind based on the channel or channels that you want to spend most of your time on. So sometimes a really focused tool would be better than just trying to get something that's pretty generic. On the email marketing side, I'm sure you're familiar with many of these names. MailChimp, Constant Contact, Automizy, Drip, and Smarter Mail are pretty good at e-commerce. And I just put that there, like for people who are doing e-commerce websites, those where they do a lot of product stuff. So that's really helpful if that's your your focus. Sendex, Email Octopus, Customer IO, and Get Response. So again, they integrate with a lot of things. They have some really great tools. They can do sequencing. They can do a lot of the things, but so does HubSpot. HubSpot has an email sequencing tool. It's just not as full featured as some of these are, right? So that's what I mean by all-in-one. A lot of those all-in-one will do it, but they won't have as many options as you might have with something that is more purpose-built. The other one here is advertising automation. So some of these are the most common ones around basically that programmatic bidding, A/B testing, trying to check your paid ads. Ad roll is probably the 800-pound gorilla in this space. Zalster and RevealBot are focused again on very specific ones. So Zalster is very focused on Facebook and Insta ads. RevealBot is focused on Google and Facebook ads. So depending on what you're using, you might want to have a different service in that space. And there are more, but I'm giving you kind of the ones that are more popular. Chatbots, I've given you quite a few. These are the ones that have a lot of sort of easy to use, drag and drop interfaces, kind of can do some interesting workflow. Many of them have a free version, so you can play around with it and see it, see if it works for you. So ManyChat, Chatfuel, Mobile Monkey. Lots of pros and cons. I've given you an article that outlines some of the pros and cons for each one of these, so you can kind of explore them and see, and price points, so you can get a better sense of which one works best for you. If you are doing that best of breed, what is really common now is using connectors, application connectors and integrators. By far, the number one is Zapier. Zapier basically has, I think, over 3,000 apps that it actually can integrate with. So it is really the 800-pound gorilla, and probably the one that works best for most organizations. There's a fee, depending on how many integrations you want to do, that's how much you pay. So you have to figure out how many zaps you want to do. If This Then That was an early starter. It was in the space, IFTTT, but If This Then That, it works a little bit better. They're really good on social media. So they have some great social media interactions and can be a lot more fine-tuned. So if you're doing social media, I might recommend focusing on that one. And they do a lot of like IoT, so Internet of Things, smart home automation. Again, if that's something in your area that you're interested in, that would be the one to do it. But Zapier by far is kind of the one that most people use, and most also apps integrate with first. So you probably want to think about that. There's a new one on the market called Make. It used to be called Integromat, and it's coming up and becoming a lot more sort of, I'd say, a competitor to Zapier. And it has some really good integrations, but I think right now it has maybe a couple of hundred integrations versus, Zapier with thousands, but it's cheaper, it can be cheaper. They have a slightly different pricing model. And if they have what you need, it might be enough, right? You may not need all 3,000. So that part of it is like 3,000 is great, but you may only need like 10. And if you only need 10, then who cares about the other, 2,990 integrations. Microsoft also has their own automation tool called Microsoft Power Automate. So if you are a Microsoft house and you have sort of the Office 365, this should be called Microsoft Flow. This is something that's available to you through those tools and works really well with all the Microsoft tools. So works well with Outlook and SharePoint and Teams and all of that. So if you're a Microsoft house, that's something that you might want to consider. Zoho Flow is for anyone using the Zoho suite. They have a suite of tools, CRM they have. And so if you're using that, this would be probably the best thing to consider, at least start. If you want to, you can always graduate to something else later. But if you're already paying for a Zoho subscription, this is something that you could use as part of that suite. And then there's another one called Outfunnel, and they're really focused on sales and marketing focus. And so what I mean by that is they're really looking at integrating with sales and marketing apps. So that's, which means social media and email marketing and things like that, but that's what they're focused on. Some of the other ones will integrate with QuickBooks and Sage and accounting and kind of give you a nice, whole business process automation option. Outfunnel is focused primarily on sales and marketing applications and integrating those for a kind of a marketing automation solution. So something to keep in mind, definitely check them out and see how that goes. I want to just sort of highlight some other automation tools that are more general. They're not so specific to marketing, but they kind of can come in handy. I'm sure many of you, so scheduling, Calendly is great for personal tasks, but there are a few others depending on what you're doing. Calendar Whiz is great if you're trying to coordinate teams. So not just like a personal thing, but a group of teams. TimeTap is very much around booking classes or training. That's what it's optimized for. And Simply Book Me is great for service-oriented professional services or organizations. And so that would be the one that I recommend around calendaring sort of at an organizational level if you're a service-based company. And then I also want to highlight proposal writing, because I know that we have some B2B companies that are often doing proposals or RFPs, or you're just doing all kinds of things where you have to put it, you're putting something in for a bid. And there are some really great proposal writing software tools, if nothing else, to get you started. What's really great about these proposal writing automation tools is that you can put in templates. It can actually connect with your QuickBooks. It can connect with Stripe. Some of these can be payments, so they can automate like your proposal with the invoicing, with the payments, with the tranches. And so, like if you have just even documents or things along those lines that require that level of integration with your other sort of, I would say, company systems, many of these can be great. Quiller at the bottom is mostly online templates, but the others actually have integration into other tools to make your proposals work better, and something to keep in mind. And again, I'm thinking about how can you save time, right? How can you actually save time? And so these are some ideas that I have, not so much marketing focused, but I thought I'd bring them in because they are important. Any questions so far? I've been kind of rambling through. All good? Okay, so next steps, what I really recommend that you think about is really identify and prioritize those potential touch points in your customer journey that could benefit from marketing automation. Where might that be? Think about it, and think about, like when we get customers, where do we want to automate things? Where don't I have time to focus on? Where would I like to have more time, or more insights or more information? Because automation can also give you information, not just save you time, but also give you more insight as to what's going on there. So putting those systems in place. Evaluate your team or your own, if you're the person, skills and interests. What is it that what is it you're capable of doing? Most of the tools that I've presented tonight are fairly what I call low or no code, meaning that it's mostly drag and drop. You're not having to do complicated coding of any sort. So they are pretty much solidly focused on what I consider most marketer skills to be. This is not about going in and doing some really complicated things. And, and if there are workflows, it's just drag and drop or things along those lines. So again, spend some time mapping or creating optimal customer journeys. This is a great opportunity to do a little bit of a look at your business and go, is this the best way to do this? Could we be doing this differently? How might we be doing this differently? Are there steps here that we can change or we could do in a different way? Before you start transferring that over to a digital system or an automation system, just take a step back and think about what you've been doing, and is that the best way to do that? Again, set those SMART goals and targets. How do you know if you've reached the finish line, if you don't know what the finish line is or what it looks like, and tie those to your business outcomes? So you actually have those goals and targets. Even if you come short, it's better to come short than to not have them at all, right? Definitely know exactly what you're trying to achieve, and that will also keep you focused. I also want to highlight that you should start small. So people are like, oh, I want to do all this automation across my whole customer journey. I recommend you pick a very specific area, maybe automate it, start with that, see how it goes, do some pilots, and then kind of continue to build it out, as opposed to trying to do it all at once. That can be just really overwhelming, as you saw, 10,000 different opportunities there, right? In terms of companies and technologies you could do. So start small, figure out an area where you think you'll get the most bang for your buck, and start there and see how well you do. Evaluate the marketing tools and solutions. So now that you know what your journey is, now that you know what you want to achieve, then go and find the technology. So don't lead with technology, start with the customer journey, start with that process, start with your your own needs, and then go pick out the marketing tools and solutions. Then train and incentivize your team or those who are going to use it around these new behaviors, these new processes. That's really critical. Don't forget to do that, and continue to check in on them to make sure that they're using them, because there's nothing worse than implementing this amazing system, paying for it, and then not having anyone use it. And then finally, you want to evaluate and assess your results often, frequently, keep doing it, see if it's working for you. There might even be further optimizations that you can make as you're going through this, and continue to sort of do this over and over again. In terms of resources, what I have, this top one here, State of Marketing Technology, MarTech report, is that image that you saw, along with a few other links, as well as a link to the Stackies. So the Stackies are also part of that first link. If you want to get a look at it, there's a downloadable there's a downloadable PowerPoint that of this marketing technology report is a downloadable PowerPoint with a lot of information about where we are today and what to consider. So I would definitely do that. I've given you a couple of links of what your MarTech stack should look like, because that's also people ask me, what should it look like? What should it include? So I've given you a couple of articles around that that you can read with some just ideas around that. I also stumbled across just literally yesterday, the top tools and apps used by digital marketing professionals. It's an infographic. It's pretty light, but it kind of gives you at least a sense of what are some of the tools that people are using in the various areas. And they break it down by email and different things. So you can get a sense of what today people are saying. It came out literally, I think, yesterday or last week. A checklist. So I've given you a couple of checklists. So if you are actually looking and evaluating what are the checklists that you should think about, I've given you some ideas, but here's something that you can kind of go through and go, yep, does this, that's that. So you don't have to think about it. You can maybe go through the checklist. Again, some marketing automation tools, 35. This one gives you reviews, pricing, pros, cons, and everything else. I didn't have all that time today to do that. Again, a few of those, time saving, 35, 11, 12 time saving. Also SMBs, because most of you don't have huge teams. So you will see things like, there are lots of great enterprise marketing automation, but you are not a company with 5,000 employees. So I thought it'd be good to also give you some ideas of sort of the small, medium-sized businesses. And then Phrase was one of those content creative AI creative things. And these are 7 alternatives. A lot of the ones that I listed there are in that article. So you can get more information about the pros and cons of AI created SEO content, email marketing tools, chat bots, Zapier alternatives, as well as some of the best proposal creation software tools to give you a better sense of what those are. So you have some resources here to get more information about what we talked about this evening, but hopefully that gives you a good sense of the landscape at a very high level, and maybe even gave you a few nuggets about what you can consider to move forward.
Thank you, Rochelle.